Welcome to Integral Christian Network Podcast, where we explore ways of evolving towards a more loving, inclusive, and embodied mystical Christianity. Well, hello, listeners, and welcome to the ICN podcast. It's another beautiful day, at least where we are. And it's a great opportunity for us to explore a subject that you've been writing about, Luke. This subject of disabusing evil. So before I jump into that, my name is David, and I am a co-host of the ICN podcast, and we welcome you. We're very excited about exploring a very fascinating, nuanced, important subject on disabusing evil. So, Luke, maybe as we jump in, I'd love to hear you share a little bit more on how you came to the subject and why you named it that particular subject. Is that a cool place to start?
Great place to start. And I was thinking about that too, coming into our conversation, like, oh, I'm excited to talk about this. I was like, is excited the right word? I mean, kind of. It feels crucial. It feels essential. It's also really hard. I mean, there is a little bit of trepidation here, honestly, right? That I think is good to acknowledge and name explicitly that this is a vast, huge subject that people have been engaging with for. So, I'm not saying I have the answers here, the total complete, but hopefully this is something that can be helpful and useful and energizing in how we encounter this in the world. And I do use the word evil. I mean, there might be different relationships that each of us have, those listening, you and I, David, with how we understand that word, what that has meant and been in our lives, conceptually, experientially, and in the world. So I'm going to maybe invite us to suspend a little bit of those prejudgments or, uh, you know, previous categorizations, because that's a little bit of what happened here with me in coming to this. I actually didn't plan to write this article. I've been, writing this We Creating series, um, exploring different aspects and dynamics of that, and a core element of it was this divine vitality, right? This engagement in um, this inner power and strength that comes from deep within that we live into. And I was writing that article, and I had a little section in there that I wanted to, it's like, oh, this is good. And then it on evil and how that can be twisted, and then it just kind of erupted into this potent energy of almost this compelling force that was like, nope, this is there's a lot more here. This isn't a small section of an article. This is an article, and a big one of that two part, right? It had to be divided into two parts because there's so much to this. There's so much energy, and different kind of ways of thinking about it. A few years back, I was really struck reading this section of Gene Gebser's Ever-Present Origin, where he was describing the magic structure of consciousness, and in particular some of the deficiencies and maladaptions of it. And it just struck me so much then that it spoke to a lot of some of the things that I saw in the world, or how I felt might explain some of these deeper dynamics of situations going on of evil. And um, so I have been holding that for years, gestating with it, absorbing it, trying to take it in. And I guess this was just sort of the eruption point and the kind of confluence of ideas um, and spiritual context, because it is very much connected to our divine vitality and our deep knowing from and being from this magic structure of consciousness, and the energy and force and life that flows in that from that. And also when it's not there, when it's absent, when it's not felt, how that twists and corrupts and um, leads to a lot of what I'm writing about here and seeing in these ways of evil. So that's kind of how it came about. And then it was like, whoa, okay, I guess we're gonna do this. I'm just gonna write about it and be with it and yeah, so here we are. We've had, a few weeks of engaging with it as a community that have been really potent and evocative and so yeah, it's again not a fun or exciting thing to explore, but there's a lot of energy to it that's here and it just has that weightiness, right? Like, oh yeah, there's something really crucial here.
It's emerging so blatantly right now in our culture, and it can be interpreted and witnessed at a few different levels. And by the way, for those that are listening, we will link to the article in the show notes so that when we use words like magic or archaic or certain words that get used from Gebser's work, it will be the link to this article will be in the show notes, and then you can click on there and see what exactly Luke is talking about. But in terms of this emerging and erupting, uh, was there a trigger? Was there something other than the reading? Was there something that within you that started to resonate with something, or was confronted by something that made it click for you? Or yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things going on in the world right now, right? That we're constantly, that are constantly put before us and that we're moving with. And, um, I always, my kind of natural predilection is to try to understand why, right? To see through, to get the, you know, what not, because some of it's so befuddling and just astounding. And how can things like this actually happen? And how can people do such things? And and it doesn't really make sense rationally, right? It doesn't even really make sense morally. You're just kind of like, what? Like, how could this even be something that a human being could do? I mean, same thing with the Holocaust or these atrocities, these things that happen. That it's like, where is the moral ground? Where is the values, the decency, the goodness, right? Um, so yeah, I think there's something to that, yeah, really connects to like, okay, we're dealing with something deeper here. And so as we're writing about that in a creative and generative way, that there's that same potency in what we can create and actually participate in um, the divine act of loving evolution that's ongoing. There's a massive shadow side to that. There's a huge, destructive, um, vicious, evil way that can be. I mentioned twisted, I think, that can arise when that's lacking, right? Because the depth of that void, if it's missing, is so um, it's so powerful. It's so yeah, just all encompassing that it just overwhelms those morals or those rationalities. And so I've encountered experiences like that. And actually, the word disabusing came in that inspiration as well. It wasn't a word that I have used before.
mm,
I'm not saying I channeled it or anything, maybe, I don't know, but it did feel received. It was kind of like, oh, this is it. And we'll talk about kind of what that means and what that looks like, but I don't want to go there too quick. I don't want to
sure.
jump to sort of how we respond or how we engage with it. It's important to really kind of be with and confront and engage with the nature of the beast a bit as well, because that understanding will be crucial to how we respond and engage with it.
Yeah. One thing that was popping up for me as you were sharing, I've gone through both of the articles that you wrote, particularly on this subject, and when you did write out, all those different structures of worldviews, or stages of consciousness, whichever framework you want to use, is that we're living in really unique times when there are the most worldviews all happening at the same time. And not without getting too historical or eating up too much time on this, you know, at least in American history, we're seeing, kind of three steps forwards, two to four steps backwards. there's like this tension and pull between worldviews that are going on right now. And each of those worldviews will define and interpret evil, how evil is viewed, or how evil behaves, or how evil is experienced, how it's interpreted and defined, which can make conversations about these things really complicated. So, I mean, I'm curious what, and I know we'll get there, but what is your hope in channeling or receiving this word of disabusing evil as we start to unpack this? What do you feel like was the hope or the aim of tackling this particular complex subject?
Mm. Well, I'll try to answer that without going too far to the solution.
Of
I
course.
think the seed of hope is the sense of recognizing that that battle of worldviews or perspectives or different um, places of understanding and ways of seeing the world is um, is limited, and how maybe even really people who are deeply engaged in spiritual work and um, evolving forms of Christianity even or different aspects of Christian and other faiths maybe are actually feeding the beast and making it worse in some ways. So that was one aspect of it, and that ties into kind of this even way of looking at it from stages, or it's not a linear thing. I want to delineate the magical structure of consciousness from magical thinking.
Mm,
Sometimes depending on, and we don't need to too nerd out on kind of the integral theory and different forms of stages versus structures of consciousness and how that moves. But as we grow in our faith and consciousness, right, one of the things is our magical thinking. We go beyond kind of this way of seeing the world um, that my children do, that are just lovely and wonderful, and the fairies, and but we can also kind of go too far beyond that, like it's something we leave behind, and it's oh, this childish ways, this childish thinking, or these, we can get locked into these mental perspectives. And actually, the source, one of the major sources of this is the loss of the magic structure of consciousness in its more healthy and integrative forms. And so, in these structures, these are aspects of our being personally, collectively, cosmically. And so if we overly get into kind of our perspectives, our mental views on things, that's not integrated with our morality, our mythic structure of consciousness, our stories, our narratives, our relationships, right? We can feel that a little more. Those people who are disconnected from that, mentally, they're lacking that kind of more heartful substantiveness, right? I think we have a better sense of recognizing when that happens. And this is another level of that, even deeper, that when we're lacking that magical vitality, that inner force and potency that comes from even deeper, um, then there's a really key aspect of our being, of our consciousness, that's missing, and it's incomplete. It's not whole, and so we're seeking to whole make in this integrative, welcoming, and engagement of the healthy magic structure, not as something we leave behind as a previous perspective, but a vital and crucial structure of consciousness that's largely been covered over and buried and suppressed and shunted in much of modern society. And actually, that is intensifying the problem of how then it still comes up. It still erupts in us in these unconscious ways that are very destructive and actually make it more easily to twist and manipulate into um, these kind of cultic forces of seeking power. Um, a lot of it's about power. So we can get into some of the specifics of that, but that's an important aspect of it. And also, want to say that this is related to a particular type of evil as well. We're not talking about all kinds of evil. There's different ways that this expresses and engages and how we see that from different perspectives and worldviews, and even experience it. That affects, how we experience these things because it is always co-created and participatory from what our subjective experiences and what is objectively in the world and in the spirit realm as well, right? So we're not talking about angels and demons, the devil, mythical aspects of evil, though I'm not necessarily denying those either. Not talking about systemic evil, even though that's very real and exists in many forms and ways. That's related as well. And also psychological evil, right? We can also often hold an understanding of the psychological aspects of um, how evil manifests, and those are also probably, those are also real and probably affect things quite a bit. But this is kind of a look at more of the primal and root aspects of um, this nature of evil from the void of the lost magic structure of consciousness.
Why do you want to start there?
Oh, it's crucial. It's so crucial because if we're looking at it in another way, in a different sense, then how we respond to it will be different.
Mhm.
So we have to actually go deep enough. And I talk about this in the article. I think a lot of times we do respond to it from these other places, and and that can be good too, right? They're necessary. So like one of the ways that we do that is like resist, right? Resist the evil, like, which is, of course, we have to resist. Like we don't just give into it. We don't, you know, but sometimes in that act, we're meeting it at the same level of which it is coming from. We're actually feeding the beast, which I'll say more about in a minute. But or we're trying to meet it with morality, with a sense of appeal to values or morality. But that's not going to work. It's not going to be effective because the source of this is underneath that, and it twists the morals and the values to serve that desire for power, that lacking of the vital life force that gives value to being able to be alive and do something in our lives that um, that matters, that's creative, that makes a difference, right? So we're dealing on a deeper level. Same with perspectives, right? If we're just trying to kind of meet it with well, if you could only see it in this way, if we give the right information, or if we, elucidate the facts, it's like, well, that we've probably all experienced that in some sense, right? Where it's like the facts come in and it doesn't matter. It doesn't like meet it. It just sort of it's not enough, right? And I think that's super crucial to understand why that happens, because it's befuddling to our rational minds, to our even our heartful, like why isn't this? It seems so obvious, right? Um, and in a way it is, but it doesn't land because it's not going deep enough to this extreme potent area of our being.
I'm reading this really wonderful book called Religious but Not Religious. And I'm going to butcher the quote that's in the book. But in a sense, he's talking about meaning making through symbols. He's a Jungian. And he said, when we approach the symbol or the meaning making through the rational mind, what ends up being controlled is the personality. But if we approach the symbol or the meaning making through the transrational mind or the non-rational mind, the soul emerges and you're able to see things from a more holistic perspective. This is another way of kind of coming at what you're sharing, because you're almost working through this in an almost chakra kind of way. You're moving up through the chakras and you're paying a lot of attention to that primal first level, uh, earthy, grounded, connected, um, way that we emerge as human beings, where we're not saying to be irrational, of course. We're not suggesting that we throw all wisdom, or be it conventional or non-conventional wisdom, but you're connecting to a sense of, at least as I hear you, a sense of wonder, openness, connection, vitality, without projection and without being monoperspectival in the way that we interact with something. So I'm really curious as to where you want to go from here.
Well, and I mean it in a sense too. Yeah, it is hard to talk about um, because yeah, some of the dynamics we are exploring here are pre-rational, they're pre-causal even. And in our evolution, right, we emerged into the mythic and even irrationality and then rationality of the mental, like, so that is a growth, that is a development that makes us more whole, but um sometimes in that we discount anything that is irrational, right, or is pre-rational, and that can get us into trouble, right, because that perspective, that structure of consciousness that sees through rationality, it's true, but it's also partial, it's not the truth, and there are aspects of this that are very pure astral, just like you're talking about with Jungian, these symbols, that's in the mythic structure primarily, although it definitely taps into that magic as well. Um, if we meet it from the top down, we're going to continue to really wrestle, and that's how we operate. So we're going to wrestle with it. It's not going to be clear. We have to welcome some of the mystery, some of the darkness, and not overly try to illuminate it with our rational mind, because that will just take it away. So it's very tricky. We are going to the roots. We are going to, you mentioned the the chakras, but in our ICN system, we have the spiritual womb, and that is the seat of our magic structure of consciousness. That is the place, and it connects to, as well with the feet and the archaic and our rootedness. It's a primal, real, elemental aspect of life and reality. And the emergence of the magic structure coming out of the archaic was this disentanglement from nature. And nature was this very scary, powerful, dominating thing that we, in our early evolution, were subject to, and it was terrifying. And so as the magic structure evolved, it erupted in order to find a way to come to have power over the forces of nature. And Gebser actually talks about this. We still live in that through, it's expressed through our technologies. Our technologies are forms of trying to have power over nature still. They're rooted in that magic structure. And I think that's maybe even one of the reasons why this is intensifying even more in this day and age with our climate crisis and sense of the inability to control nature, or even how we are, being detrimental to that and how that's affecting the world. And so we're trying to find that power over again in many different ways. So it connects into, yeah, this deep rootedness, this deep sense, and that's really crucial to move into and recognize because, well, one, we have to disentangle our roots from our own inner sources of desire for power. We all need that power, and in the divine vitality is very powerful, but that is rooted in the goodness of God and the fullness of life. But it's not so black and white. It's not so, good and evil. There are ways that we seek that as well. Again, in that pre-rational space that is trying to uh, create our inner power of being. And again, it's before values, it's before morals. So there's all these dynamics of it that really that we can struggle with. But some of the things we need to do are disentangle our roots and feel into that and sense that we need one another to help in that mirroring and shadowing, but really seeing those deeper forces of why we're meeting this, how we're meeting it. And I think one of the I guess, strongest ways that I've seen a lot, and I've done it myself, in meeting these areas of what we recognize as evil is how we're feeding the beast. We're intensifying the fight through our own resistance and through our own kind of. uh, way that we're attacking it kind of from and of a similar energetic force or quality or capacity than as what we're meeting. It's similar to that, right? Have you ever had that experience, right, where it's like you get so enraged by something, we don't even need to take it to a personal conversation or setting or something, right? But there kind of rise up this feeling of oh, and you can almost feel the vitriol in it, right? Righteous anger can easily come from this place too. And so again, we're not getting black and white. Anger's good, right? There's ways that it's very helpful and important, but then when we go to meet this situation, this thing, we have this kind of like, you know, this it can be vitriolic, it can be arrogant, it can be um, just tainted. And I think we all have that within us. Again, going deeper than our sort of moral judgments of that, it there is a root of it that is this force of justice, this force of this is not how life should be, and this is what life is in the creative sense, and this is not. And so, um, but as we pull that into morals, as we pull that into perspectives, um, we're sometimes feeding the beast in how we respond and engage with it. We're not actually getting underneath it to our own sources, and we're of disentangling our roots, um, which I think is one of the reasons why we're so drawn to people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Malala. Like that, they don't they didn't they refused to participate in the fight, but they were rooted in their own divine power and truth and reality that was strong and full, because it came from that deeper place of what I'm calling divine vitality. And that's so crucial because it's so easy to just fall into that fight and that resistance that feeds the beast, and it actually makes it worse because that's what that evil is looking for. It's the fight itself that gives it its power because it doesn't have the rootedness in that deeper divine vitality. So it seeks it in the act of fighting itself. So it's the fight that matters. It's not right or wrong. It's not the it's winning. It's winning, and it's engaging in that fight that gives this illusion of power and strength, but it's actually really false. So,
Mm. I guess something that's coming from me as I'm listening to you is maybe on a how it shows up for me practically is that when I get triggered by watching violent, be it emotional, political, verbal evil occur, is when I get triggered by that is to presence the most raw aspects of it within myself, to um and it's not like I'm well practiced at this, but obviously the news gives me ample opportunity to kind of, okay, here's my initial sense of insight, opinion, perspective. But if I keep relaxing and presencing to all the layers that can, I think the only thing that we know of that's faster than the speed of light is the speed of thought. So yeah, if you think in terms of physics, that's absolutely astounding. That if the speed of thought is faster than the speed of light, you can see why we're in such a reactive world. But if I keep presencing deeper and deeper and deeper into that raw sense of power, not as an opportunity to control, to judge, to do something that is matching ignorance with ignorance or cruelty with cruelty or, you know, um, harshness with harshness, acting out on social media or whatever. And there are times to announce without being self righteous, but you get what I mean. So to
yeah.
stick to the point is just to keep moving down, 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 down into the roots that you're talking about, the womb space of what what is this raw power, not power over, not power against, not power, as violence, but
Mhm.
power,
Yeah.
that is raw and untamed, or not untamed again in the sense that I'm going to act out on this, but it's there at the very ugh, the very core and center. Um, is this what you're
Yeah,
leaning
yeah,
towards?
yeah.
Yeah.
That,
So kind of like how we presence that. Again, you presence is not just a thing we do, you know, but it's learning to relax and to deepen and to going to use the phrase transcend and include, but you're moving inwardly while holding things outwardly
hmm
and sitting with that whole that those just that spiral or that those layers of those things
Yeah.
as
hmm
a way of disabusing evil by seeing how is that raw power seated and centered and interacted and presenced within myself.
hmm
And I could go off on this on how this plays out and relate, say my wife and I are watching the same thing and having similar responses. But
hmm
yeah, I'm curious to hear, how does that show up for you, or what's an example of, how you work through this?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great way that you talked about and explained it because it's a both and like we do need to so we're seeking conscious participation in the magic structure of consciousness. So we're not just giving ourselves over to a complete loss or sacrifice of consciousness or into that unconscious there are magical states that can move us in that way and can be in a trusted container can be beneficial, but in this sense, yeah, we're looking at when that's there. It's crucial to have that perspective, that recognition, that um, transcendence and immanence, right? But we're
Mm,
not just detaching from it and viewing it and judging it or evaluating it or analyzing it, right? Maybe there's time for that, place for that, but when we're doing that, we're cutting ourselves off from the imminent potency of that power in our own lives, which actually
right.
makes the problem worse in the long term.
No,
It's
you're right.
a form of disassociation or detachment, right? So we need to immunize with and into that at the same time, and that would be a quality of the integral structure of consciousness that we can be transparent and illuminative with both of those capacities co-present in us. So, like, yeah, aspects of how we present. That's a big part of our work at ICN. That's part of the whole body mystical awakening aspect that we're seeking to be in more conscious participation with that. And it's crucial to own that, to move with it, and yes, try to understand it, have insight, but also welcome the positive, beneficial, true, real, full ways of that we also can't quite fully understand or see or name, right? Um, so that's one of the ways that we welcome that force in our lives and its positive aspect, and seek to participate in that more consciously, which will then um, keep the void from springing up in unconscious ways. I did want to read this one quote from Gebser because it speaks to this exactly, and it might be a little well, I'll just read it. He says about it too. He says, "Only our insight into this power that constitutes us." It this power constitutes us. Like it literally it makes this is our life power, our power of being alive and human, and that is so crucial because again, if that's missing, we don't feel like we have any life power, which is why appeals to morals and rationality won't matter. So this power that constitutes only our insight into this power that constitutes us can release us from its blindness. When we're in it fully unconscious, we're blind. If we do not gain the insight, the unconsciously activated magic structure will ultimately, at least for us today, lead via the atomization of vitality, the psyche, and the ego to destruction. So that vitality, that magic structure, the psyche, our being, our mythic structure, and the ego, our mental, like they'll just continue to atomize and section off and be destructive. So we have to have this insight. That's the hope. That's the thrust behind this. Is like if we don't see this, we're just going to continue to atomize and attack and be entangled in this deep mess of false power and lack. So.
Mm. It's Yeah, a couple things stand out to me as you're reading that. The rational mind is such a hamster wheel. I mean, it's like I don't want to be too harsh on it, but it's like being a junkie. I mean, if you get a fix on being right about something, or having a sense of righteous rage, or whatever it is, or those people, like dot dot dot, that just becomes such an ego addiction. Imagine fasting from that for Lent. But one thing that you used, and you created a word that I don't want to let skip by, because you said immanence or something like that, where you're dealing with transcendence and immanence, right? These two, I don't like saying it this way, but these two dimensions to reality. There's more than these two dimensions, but they're in our English language. We try to find ways to explore what is this that always lets me know that there's something beyond this. There's something beyond this horizon. There's something more, and it is the evolutionary impulse. It's part of the eros that's inherent within us, but also the immanence, meaning the here-ness and the nowness. There's almost like a sense of chronos. The time does move forward, and things move forward, and evolution is not a straight line. It's got all kinds of curves and craziness to it, but there's always that sense of infinite or eternal immanence, this eternal nowness that's going on. And when we do check in with ourselves at this raw level that you're talking about, we're not favoring one over the other. In fact, both have to interact with one another as we're doing this. This can sound really heady, but actually, um, I'll share an exercise that I did at a retreat a little while back, and at my retreats, I kind of have a tool bag that I bring with me. There's a general direction, but you never know what's going to come up once the chemistry of the room gets going. And so, at one point in the retreat, I did a little experiment, and just I'm not asking anybody here to believe in reincarnation, but let's just say for a moment that we are all our source, our infinite source, who's still creating this whole thing, gives the individuation of the soul the option of being anybody in history. How does that change your view of that person, that you were them maybe in one lifetime? And that can sound super abstract, but I said, choose a member of your family that caused you a lot of suffering. What would it be like if you manifested at them for a lifetime? How does that affect your, if there was an abuse of power? And this can be real. I mean, this is really deep, hard work, because you're not just doing multi-perspectivalism. You were like sinking into the other person's, what made them turn out the way that they were. And how do I hold that with grace and compassion, and not just as a thought exercise, but really sit there for a moment and say, what would it be like to this person who gave me a hard time, be it a bully, or a family member, or someone who caused my people group a lot of suffering. You mentioned, for instance, Dr. King and Gandhi. I would throw in Desmond Tutu in that, Rosa Parks. I mean, notice all of these are what we white folks would say people of color, although we're the minority on the world stage. We're holding up these people who did extraordinary amounts of inner work, of holding that very base level of not base in the moral sense, but at this core structure of power, and bringing online this sense of lightness to them. I mean, Dr. King could be very confrontational, but if you talk about like someone like Desmond Tutu, I think he and the Dalai Lama saw each other, they were tickling each other. Like, this man experienced a tremendous amount of abuse, and yet there's this playfulness to him, that because that magical structure was, to use a Christian word, it was redeemed, it was made whole, it was online, it was there, it was like this. It did not diminish either him or his embracing of reality as it is, or people. I don't know. I'm kind of lit up by what you're sharing, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that, in a certain sense, that when we bring the transcendence and the immanence to this power that we want to disabuse, um, I would say in not in defense, but in praise of our early ancestors, you know, were they trying to, I guess in some cases they were trying to exercise power over creation or over nature, but I would venture to guess that they were saying they were trying to participate with it. Yeah, there's probably a manipulation of the gods that were going on as they're slitting the throats of animals or people. But maybe on the healthy side of it is that, there's some participatory amazing creative, resonance with nature as it is. Thankfully, we do have more online and more available to us to where we're not killing people or animals to try to manipulate the weather. But yeah, I'm
Yeah,
doing a lot
yeah, for
now,
sure.
but what's yeah.
Yeah, every structure has an as Gebser terms, efficient or deficient forms of,
Mm,
right? So there's ways that these manifest and express as yeah, unhealthy and a lot of the magic structure that's encountered today through I mean, he talks about sorcery and spell casting, and right, that we have these forms that are deficient. Really, they're not tapping into the true efficient vital essence of it that participates, especially in a conscious way, with our other structures. And that could be its own whole exploration. But it is crucial that immanizing, if that's a word, right? Immanence, transcend. Like we can't just rise above. We can't just continue to try to, transcend all of it because that detaches us from it and it too easily reinforces the arrogance of the lack of our participation in the substance and the reality of that. Like that, there's a reason why that's often associated with this sort of aloofness or, we talk about Tutu and his, the laughter and the liveliness, right? This vitality, like we have this inner longing for it, all of us, right? And that's where, if we're getting too heady in any sense, like just tap into that for a minute, like sink down and just feel like, oh, yeah, like that. There is an inner vitality that is within us, and maybe we're missing that in some ways. I'm sure we all are. And again, that can tie into how we might have roots in sources of ways that we try to feel that power. And that might be through a sports team. It might be through yeah, oh, cheering for it to win and get into that, oh, that kind of primal
mm,
energy. Or it might be for, put onto a guru, or, oh, this is the person that has life, the political figure, right? You see a lot of that too. There's kind of this almost fanatical devotion to whether it's a person or maybe even a cause or a party on any side that might be, right? That this kind of allegiance to something more that we feel like can tap us into that power, but those are all external things. And of course, we need the external as well, in healthy ways, balanced with a true inhabited inner aliveness. And that's where this is really getting to. That's actually how we disabuse. That's how we stand in our more and more of our fullness of power. It's helpful to look outside at the good examples of it. We could certainly throw Jesus in there too, as someone who very much lived in this power. I mean, and it gives a force to our voice. It has a voice. I go in the article, I talk about this, right? When Jesus says to Matthew, "Follow me," that's all he says, and Matthew like quits his career, and but he knew it. He wasn't just speaking to. He didn't give him these rational arguments or this appeal to morals or this the right thing. Matthew maybe knew something about Jesus, but there's this depth of power and potency in those words that Matthew heard at the deep soul level. And maybe we can hear that too, this sense of like, yeah, there's this deep inner life that we can inhabit and be with, and that is the divine potency, the divine vitality, the force of life that comes from within, from that deep source. The source aspect of our magic structure is essential. Gebser called it the ever-present origin,
mm,
this ever-flowing life, and reality that I think a lot of people maybe don't live with or feel, or I know I spent a lot of my life not not being tapped into that, not having a conscious sense of feeling and living from that reality. So again, like we can feel into ways, as you're saying, these people, maybe family members or people that we know who've had that void, they've had that, and how does that feel from the inside? And that can be yeah, a powerful exercise, I'm sure, to recognize that and know that this evil, this type of evil is not intrinsic to who we are. It is not um an aspect of our fundamental nature. No, not at all. We all have this inner capacity for goodness and divine life that gets lost or missed or distorted or you know so that's crucial to say as well. So
Absolutely.
we can recognize and understand that if we're attaching this to any one personal figure, and at the same time we also have the power to say like, but that's evil. Like, well, yes, we want to understand where people are, but just like those other figures, right? That wasn't an excuse or an acceptance of the acts of evil and the things that were done by the powers that held those in destructive ways that were, um, you know, yeah, hurting people deeply and tragically. So we can get into some of the specifics of the act of disabuse, but that's such a crucial aspect of it to really inhabit and come from that depth of inner divine life and vitality with the recognition of shadow and knowing the limitations of our perspectives, and with compassion and humility and love for the people who are caught up in that because they are being abused by it. That's a key aspect of the disabuse. It is an abusive relationship, and abusers are often those who are abused. So again, there's that both and, right? These aren't victims totally, right? We all have choices, we all have ways of moving with this, but the literal meaning of disabuse is to dispel the abuse. It's to disenchant or disillusion, to take away the illusion that someone is under. And that's the potency of that word that just kind of came like, oh, this is a way of response that is kind of, at least what I'm trying to say here, kind of hitting the nail on the head for that posture and way of engaging with it.
Yeah. There's that oft for those of us that are raised in the church, I'd like to put it within an ICN context that the primary emissaries in the making, Jesus' primary students, were ranking, they're kind of squabbling over which one of them is the most mystical, which one is the most developed. This never happens in developmental circles, by the way. Never, ever, ever happens. But it did happen to his students for some reason. And nobody does guru worship, in our circle. Well, anyway, so they're arguing which one of us is the most developed, which one of us is the most spiritual, the most mystically inclined. And Jesus, and while that's happening, there's kids playing around him, and one of the spiritual leaders said, "Hey, get out of here," because kids weren't, taken seriously in that culture. And Jesus grabs the kid, comes over, and blesses him, and says, "This right here, the like a child is, and it was a young child, right? We're not talking about a preteen or something. This is a young kid. There's that power that we're talking about. I mean, there's that structure at that particular level. He said, unless you have this online in you, and I don't want to use digital language, but unless this is in contact within you, you're not going to be able to have access to the divine realms as I've been teaching you. And there's something to that inner 6, 7, 8-year-old David or Luke or whoever, all of us, that when we look into that self, how he was open. I'll give you a practical example. So, I'm wired as an introvert, but as I've been getting older, I've been trying to find new ways to kind of relax away from those patterns. So I was at a conference with, 500, 600 people. And I decided I'm going to go in with a sense of wonder, not a sense of naivete, but a sense of that childlike wonder. Wow, there's like five, 600 little universes that are walking around this room talking, and I'm interacting with a lot of them and doing it with that kind of childlike sense of wonder. Every person that comes into my presence is this little God who is a universe, a Bible unto themselves, a recording of amazing experiences, and I get to be present to that. Here's the thing that happens, because this is I've been doing this as a practice for I'd say maybe the last 6 7 months. I want to be truthful when I say this, so definitely the last 6 7 months. I'm not tired.
Hmm.
I used to be exhausted if I was out, INFJ, whatever. If I was out and having to be present to tons of people, I realize we're a little off topic, but it actually connects quite beautifully to what we're saying here. Um, I didn't walk away exhausted. I mean, I was a little energetically drained, but not like crashing for 2 or 3 days. What I'm trying to get at here is that when that sense of, oh boy, another person I got to talk to, or I wonder what this person's agenda is. And again, I'm not forfeiting wisdom or just walking into it like some dum dum, but being open to that sense of wonder to the person or persons or peoples that I'm interacting with that disabuse of power. What can I get out of this conversation? What can I sell through this conversation? How can I get this person to, move towards me or me as opposed, or how could we bark about the same world issues and really get hopped up on how right we are about everything?
Yeah.
Like, what if their genuine, like childlike contact with each other was made accessible and available? And it ended up just being, as an example, again, I've been practicing this for a bit, but it just ended up being way more life-giving as
Hmm.
opposed to life-taking,
Yeah.
or like soul sucking or whatever, just like ego draining. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
think that's fair. They did. Yeah, if it's okay to jump in, and it's yeah. I mean, the power of the life force. I mean, it's enlivening, right? That's the essence of it, and we're not caught in these mental games of trying to manipulate power in a way that is controlling or self-serving, or all these other things. Because again, we're talking about power here, and we might have negative connotations with power. I know I have in the past. But power is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's essential. It's crucial, right? Our life power and how we use it, how we engage in the power with, and what you're talking about is this open sense of wonder that invites a collective engagement in more of the true essence of the power of being a human, of being alive, of having all these, this universe, and engaging at that level. I'm an introvert as well, and yeah, it's a totally different source and way of engagement that's totally tied into this whole aspect of the magic structure of consciousness. And I think Jesus teaches that, he points to this in various ways, becoming like little children, and having that directness of engagement. They run to him, right? Or this openness, this curiosity, and to be, wise as serpents, innocent as doves, right? There's not power can be a dangerous thing too. So we have that conscious recognition, and the places where I don't know what type of conference you're at, but I'm guessing it's maybe of a certain sort. Although you can find people anywhere that where we're still approaching that with wisdom and recognition, but we're not constrained by
Right.
that those games and that fear and the rankings and the all the things you were talking about before. But when we're able to stand more fully in the truth of our own divine vitality and the ways that that comes forth with creativity and curiosity, and that's such an aspect. And I think it also points to how Jesus teaches us to love our enemies, because the flip side of it is, um, we're not always totally accepting. We're not always just welcoming and bringing everything in. I kind of alluded to this earlier, right? In a similar way, sometimes, our own process of coming to that divine vitality might require a death and a resurrection,
Yeah.
in the full meaning of what that is in us. And so there are areas, there are aspects, there are places where that needs to be separated from. There needs to be release. There needs to be a standing apart. And so, in loving our enemies, I think sometimes we think of that as like, oh, unconditional love. No, no, I don't think I don't think that's the agape as much as it is the eros, the evolutionary eros that recognizes separateness, that recognizes there are these things that are apart, and there's an ache in that, there's a pain in that, and if that other if that other is um like Jesus, how Jesus encountered the Pharisees or the religious leaders who were being destructive. They were in those games, those abuses, and doing it to others, right? We're not gonna accept that. We're not gonna try to unconditionally embrace or bring together too soon. Um, Bipartisanship without recognition of injustice and like it doesn't work. We can't do that yet. The evolutionary arrows, yes, it can draw us hopefully into a fuller, deeper unification, a coming back together. But if we're standing in the truth and fullness of our own divine power, there will be times when there is this stop, this no, this setting apart, and that's okay. Not only is it okay, it's essential, it's good because that's also part of the disentangling of the recognition that um, there are these false and distorted ways of power, and to love them is um, not to excuse them, not to um, allow them even really, right? There are acts of disabuse, and that's a crucial movement in engaging with this.
Many of the people, I'm sure there's plenty of folks who know this, and I can't recall if we've done this on a podcast before or not. But the whole turn the other cheek section is not an invitation to be a doormat. Anybody during that time would have known that if someone slapped you with their dominant hand, which in that time was the right hand, and he said turn the other cheek, he's literally saying that the hand that you wipe with, that person will smack you with that hand, which puts shame on them. So turning it the other cheek would have been a code phrase for help your oppressor to see how shameful they're behaving. That's not an invitation to be a doormat. It's an invitation of saying, see, see how shameful you're behaving by doing this. To walk an extra mile with someone who's forcing you to walk an extra mile is insight, not discipline. And there's a massive difference when we're talking about this disabusing of evil. It's not a discipline or a fixed position. Love is not a fixed position. Love is not, and by fixed position, what I mean is it's not like a politically fixed position or a morally fixed position. It's a moving target. And the goal is to awaken people, not to just reinforce why we're on separate side of things, but I'll do something nice just to show you how cool and how righteous I am, right? So I there's a section that when I was in deconstruction, I wanted to first off, I wasn't reading the Bible very much, and I wanted to rip out most of Paul's letters. But I'm gonna now that I'm post deconstruction, I've returned and learned some things when I was in seminary about recovering the original Paul, and it's called the New Perspective on Paul. But I'll just say that there's this interesting passage that connects to another one that might help wrap this up nicely, where he says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And if sin is just merely behavior, we kind of miss the point. Sin is where we have cut ourselves off from love. That can be an interiorized thing where I've cut myself off from the source of love, and where we've been talking, that center of gravity that you and I have been talking about. It could be all over the map where I've cut myself off from love and therefore do self sabotaging behaviors or behaviors that sabotage others. But when we think of sin as an area of our lives where we've been cut off from love, then what he's saying there is not a statement of moralizing at people, but it's an invitation to say, but you're actually built not to be cut off from love. And to fall short of the glory of God means actually you're made for the glory of God. Sure, we've all fallen short of that, but you're actually made for that. And then he follows that up in just later in his letter, where he says, "Don't be overcome by what we English speakers have chosen to translate as evil, but overcome evil with good." And again, that's not doing it's not a reluctant move towards doing something nice to your abuser, but to help those that are oppressing you. Remember, you know, early Christians would they weren't popular because they were doing something new, and every time something new emerges, we're all we as a species tend to treat it with great suspicion at the very least, and with violence at the regular. So he's saying this to a people who are saying, look, work from insight, disabuse evil from insight, and insight requires us, it requires us to have what we're talking about be fully intact from the ground up. And by the way, I'll finish by saying that, I've been feeling it throughout our conversation. It's like just this openness that happens through my legs, through my pelvis area, up into my womb space. It's like this pulsating openness to say, yes, yes, yes. This is what I'm talking about. I'm connecting with what Luke is sharing, and I'm connecting with the truth of what's being shared.
Beautiful. And that's, yeah, I mean, we could call that the glory of God, right? Those are, to me, maybe to some, those religious terms, right? These kind of groupings have this potency to them and sometimes can get a little like, oh, what does that mean? Or how do,
Right.
but that's divine vitality. I mean,
Yes, that's
that's
glory.
this glory that we can inhabit and live into, and we do fall short of that all the time, right? We live in the smallness of our of our limited, lacking self. And so that is really the essence of the movement of disabusing evil, is standing in the truth and fullness and power of our divine vitality, the glory of God in and who we truly are. Which I want to say two things about as we close here.
Mm.
One is that and the more that we do that, the more that we live into that power, um, the more that we come to recognize our divine vocation, our our true voice, our fullness of who we are and what we are meant to be and do in the world as makers, as we creators of the universe in its ongoing unfolding. That's our divine participation. What does God do? God loves, God creates. Okay, in the fullness of our glory of God, we love and we create, right? The universe is still unfolding, and the forms of the uniqueness that takes, because the magic structure is also the root of our creative uniqueness. We stand in who we truly are, and in that creative power, we are becoming makers. We're bringing about, and that enlivens us. That's what's lacking in that evil distorts when that power isn't there. So when we live in that and we stand in that, we actually there are times that we need to stand apart, right? And disentangle from, but we don't have to fight the evil as much. There are times we have to fight, again, this particular form of evil. When we stand in that fullness, it reveals the impotence of that false power. Like it just like, oh, like if like you're saying you're feeling that now through roots of command. It's like the fullness of that way of living is so much greater than the false powers that get manipulated and pulled into forms of this evil. So that's such a crucial aspect. The more that we live into that, there it's an attractive force. It's a compelling engagement in a way of living that's so much more than, and so it kind of those roots shrivel. Um, and again, some of those figures we've named, there is that sense of like, oh, this is so much better than that. Like, why would I even? And it's not because it's more right, or it's not because it's more rational, even though it is in both of those cases. It's because it's rooted in the fullness of that power that taps into that deeper level that we were talking about earlier, right? That actually meets and can be heard and felt by people who might be caught up in that or abused in it. The second thing is that it's not individualized. It's not
Right.
just the I. The magic
Yes.
structure of consciousness as we experience it in any one of our individual beings is real and true um, and good, but it's not the full truth. The we and the all, right? The creative force and power is we creating. That's why it's called we creating. Even our vocation, divine vocation, we can think of that as sort of our singular, my role, my career path, right? That's a whole other article, but it's actually who we truly are and how we live that forth together. What is the divine vocation of the body of Christ, the mystical body of Christ, and how do I come into that? That is, again, that loving evolution that we participate in, that we become makers of and through and with one another. No single one of us is doing that alone. We are engaged in that work communally, and from that communion is the springboard that arises the new forms and the new capacities and consciousness and life and goodness. And so and it's in participation with the wider universe, with the world. It's in the immanence of the here and now, and it's the coming together of heaven and earth, right? It's not
Yes.
just this sort of, escape into an afterlife or a distant heaven. No, again, it's the coming together, the bringing that about through the work of loving evolution, which is what we're doing. And it's so powerful. It's so enlivening. It's just, and this is what, folks in the community are experiencing, and I have too. It's just the the calling, the passion, the energy of that is um it's unlike anything else because it's
Mm.
that divine essence, that glory of God. Um and even talking about it, feeling into it now, it makes the evil seem so small, which is wild to say. Like, even as I say that, I'm like, there's things happening in the world right now that are just these atrocities, and it's just like, what? Like, and yet, and yet, it's 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 so small. Um, it's so um, powerless
Mm.
somehow, in some way, in this way of being, this mystical inhabiting, this divine becoming, this um, whole body mystical enlivening that we engage in together. Um, yeah, it has that power to disabuse the evil. Not going to dispel it from the whole world or, um, from everywhere and everything, but it can in our spheres of influence and um, our relational contexts, and certainly in our own inner being and power, again, personally and collectively.
I would like to offer a benediction here from the Gospel of John Lennon. And we all shine on like the moon and the stars and the sun.